Welcome to the SpiritWoke Podcast, podcasting from the beautiful city of Stillwater, the birthplace of Minnesota. Are you going through a spiritual awakening? Do you wish to learn more about continued spiritual growth and want to meet others who are on a similar journey? We hope that this podcast and its community can be a meaningful resource for you. The SpiritWoke Podcast welcomes special guests from around the globe who share personal stories of their awakening journey, along with details of spiritual abilities they've developed along the way. So buckle up and get ready for this exciting episode. And now, here's your host, Adam Dins.
Friends, welcome back to the SpiritWoke Podcast. On this episode, we'll be speaking with Jarvis, proprietor of Soulful Surrender, www.soulfulsurrender.com, about intuitive medicine. Anne is a seasoned intuitive energy healer and holistic nutritionist. In addition to that, Anne is a seer that loves working with and teaching others how to access the blueprints of their souls. In addition to that, Anne's also a medical intuitive. Anne has a soft, gentle, and direct approach to helping others wake up, and Anne resides in Ottawa, Ontario, with her husband and their young daughter. Anne, welcome back to the SpiritWoke Podcast.
Thank you, Adam. I'm very excited to be here again with you.
We haven't had very many guests. In fact, we haven't had any guests that have been back twice, and Anne has been back twice, but Anne has managed to even beat that record. Anne's back for the third time.
Yay! It's awesome.
It is wonderful, and it's really great to have such a good friend in Anne, and she's just so knowledgeable about things spiritual. I know she's probably blushing over there and yada yada, but it's great to just have someone with so much insight from so much experience in her own life to be here to share so much with us and such an open heart to share. So I'm so grateful for you, Anne, and thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. Thank you for providing an awesome platform to have these conversations. They're awesome.
It's my pleasure. So Anne, on the first episode, shared a lot of knowledge about how to connect with our spirit guides. And on the second episode that Anne was on, she talked to us about the blueprints of our soul. So those are both on our on the SpiritWoke website, spiritwoke.com. So go back there if you haven't listened to those episodes yet and check them out. I promise you that they are going to be incredibly rewarding for you to listen to. But today we're going to get into a topic that, in all honesty, I really don't know a lot about. I haven't been exposed to it all that much, but it's related to Anne's gift as a medical intuitive. And, Anne, my wife and I, we were at an event a few months ago, and she spoke with a medical intuitive. And it was the first time I'd ever heard of the term. And, my wife shared a bit with me about what the medical intuitive told her. And it kind of blew my mind. And so, without rehashing that, could you tell us a little bit about what a medical intuitive does?
A medical intuitive is someone that is able, through one of their extrasensory, perceptual abilities. So we've sort of got four different intuitive pathways through which we can pick up extrasensory information. So some people see, and you call that clairvoyance. Some people hear, and that's called clairaudience. Some people get feelings about things, and that is called clairsentience. And then other people just sort of in their body talk about having a knowing of things, and that's called claircognizance. So what a medical intuitive does is they're able to sort of be with someone, whether that's in person or not, because we're talking about energy here, right? So you don't actually have to be in the same room as someone to, get a peek at their energy. And they're able to see, what's going on in the body. And if there's imbalances in the body, a medical intuitive can pick up on that and also sort of see, the energy that is supporting that imbalance in the body. So it's kind of a cool practice because when you take away the labels of, let's say, some diseases or afflictions that people receive, you sort of just break it down to, well, there's, an imbalance here or there. And this is really the energy that's supporting it. So you can kind of take someone away from, sitting under a label of something, which can be really stressful in and of itself. And you just sort of get back to, okay, here's what, I'm seeing or feeling or knowing in the body. And here's what might be holding that in place. So that's a really quick snapshot of medical intuition.
So when you say that you see something that may be an energy imbalance within somebody's body, within their energy body, is that like, do you see colors? Do you see do you see where in the body it is? And are you able to detect what that imbalance is, if it's a thought or an emotion or just something that's been suppressed?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it would be different for different medical intuitives, that's for sure. But yeah, you can often pick up on color. Sort of at least in my experience, the darker the color that I see, I'm looking at, not a wonderful situation in the body. But when I work, I guess I can really only speak for myself here, but when I work with someone, bodies tend to speak to me. So I'm both a seer and a feeler, but what really, when I work on a medical intuitive level, bodies tend to speak to me. So, an ovary, for example, might pipe up and say something like, I'm feeling a little bit heavy and stressed. And so, I'll ask the person that I'm with, do you ever feel a bit of a dull ache, let's say if it's the right ovary, in your lower right side? And they might say, yeah, actually, I do. Every time I menstruate, I feel this sort of dark, sort of, heavy energy in my lower right side. And that's, confirmation for me that, there just might be some stagnant energy. There might be some fear being held in the body, or there might be some tension, or there might be some old trauma that's being held in the body.
Wow, that's fascinating. So let me ask you this question. So that's has a lot to do with physical health. Do you ever sort of get any medical intuition regarding someone who has issues going on in their mind or in their, maybe psychological imbalances?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, for me, that's the primary information that will come to me, simply because, by the time something settles into the physical body, it always shows up first as an energy imbalance, usually. And so that usually starts in the form of, we bump up against some kind of challenge in our lives. And then, we're sort of walking down, unless we in the moment are able to shake it off. And, most of us just, kids are really good at shaking things off, really little kids. And then, as we get older, we tend to sort of hold on for whatever reason. And so, yeah, absolutely. Very often, the first thing that I will see in someone is the emotional blockage. And I know if there is, some kind of physical impairment going on or imbalance going on, I don't think I've ever been with someone where there hasn't been an associated, emotional blockage associated with the physical imbalance. And so what's really cool about it is that, you can work with someone and say, okay, there's something going on in this part of the body. And, I see that you've been holding on to, let's say, unexpressed grief. So grief, for example, unexpressed grief, that is, tends to sort of settle in people's lungs. And so people that are either asthmatic or who tend to have chronic bronchial problems, like they get, pneumonia, they get bouts of pneumonia every year, or they get bronchitis every year, or they just have, a persistent cough that doesn't seem to go away. That, for example, is often unexpressed grief. So when you work with someone and you start to move some of these held, sometimes long held emotions, the physical imbalance it'll just clear up on its own. So it's really fascinating to watch.
That is really fascinating, mind-blowing. A question I have, just to dig a little bit deeper in, and kind of tying it back to maybe spiritual awakening, for those of us who have gone through spiritual awakening, part of that awakening and becoming conscious is also healing, right? And healing from the things that we've been through in life that maybe have kind of clogged our emotional arteries up, right?
Yeah.
And, even personally speaking, I found not that it's easy, but maybe it's easier to identify some of the things that are within us that are causing us that, some challenges, right? Some pain or some unresolved inner conflict or hurt or trauma that we've suffered. Some things that are obvious that we remember, that we recall. But then, I think there's other areas that maybe are really suppressed down deep that aren't really in our consciousness per se. They're just so subconscious, like the peeling of the onion, like way down deep, and that we're just not even aware of to some extent. And do you find with medical and being a medical intuitive that you're able to see, like if someone comes to you and they're like, and maybe this isn't like an appropriate scenario, but if someone comes to you and says, Anne, I've done everything I can, like, to go through and heal things that are, that I'm aware of that are going on inside of me, but I feel like there's other things going on and I don't know what those things are. And then, is there any way that you can help people like that with medical intuition, or is that something different?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Adam. So I'll give you an example. Maybe the best way that I can describe this is by giving you an example. So I had a client, and this was about a year and a half ago, probably. And I tend to attract people with digestive disorders just because I've lived with my own. I have a very long history of Crohn's disease, which I've since healed, sort of by doing this, exact sort of thing that we're talking about. But I had a young woman that came to see me, and she also had Crohn's. And, she had sort of exhausted everything. She'd been to, she had some great doctors. She'd had some great naturopaths. So she'd done both the conventional and alternative, routes. And she just sort of felt like she was stuck and, had been feeling better, but the Crohn's was still, locked in with her. And so after, a couple of sessions of just getting to know her and looking at her energy and, just unraveling just even some little bits about her life, one of the things that really showed itself for her was a real need to have control. She really, really did not like to be out of control. And that is something that's quite common to people with digestive disorders. It's one of the reasons that, for me, I've worked with the energy of surrender so much the last several years because I was a total control freak. I was, and not necessarily outwardly controlling, but extraordinarily self-controlled. I wouldn't let myself cry in front of anyone. I wouldn't let myself get upset. I just had to be level all the time. And that, that is going back to being a little kid. And so after a couple of sessions with this client of mine, I started recognizing a really similar pattern. And when I, and you're sort of, very mindful about the way, you present things to someone that they may not be aware of yet. But, the truth has a way of, sort of ringing all the bells inside of someone. The truth, when presented, will usually be recognized. And as soon as we started talking about it, she said, "Oh, yeah," she smiled and she said, "I wouldn't have put it that way." She said, "I would have said that I'm just really hypervigilant." I said, "Yeah, well, of course, that's, just an offshoot of control." And, she sort of laughed and then really, really, took to the notion of working with letting go and working with surrender and working with being okay, being messy, and even, and this is a big one for people who work as medical intuitives, even just being okay that there's something not okay with the body.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's sort of the first place that, when you're fighting what is, that in and of itself is a huge, attempt at control. And you can imagine what happens in the body when we're fighting what is. The body contracts, we're not in relaxed. We might even be in fight or flight, which of course kicks up all kinds of inflammatory cytokines in the body. And then off we're rolling with these stress responses within the body, which is really what we don't want when we're trying to look at healing the body. So it was a really, for me, it was a really interesting thing to work with. It was, first of all, mirroring what I was already working with within myself. And it was really neat to watch her unwind with that. And, she went to some really cool places. She ended up getting pregnant, about a year later, which, was something that she had worried about. And so it was really neat to watch that unfold.
Wow, that's really cool. That's such a gift to be able to help people too, to come to that the realization, because there's only so much that talk therapy can do. I've gone through talk therapy and it's great, don't get me wrong, but sometimes you just need something more than that. And this is just, and even traditional medicine, right? Like traditional medicine gets you so far, but sometimes you have to address the spiritual issues that are going on, the soul issues, to really fully recover in the right way. And even if you do recover medically, through traditional medicine, there's no guarantee that the problem won't come back if you don't take care of those underlying issues.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because, every physical imbalance has a set of roots to it, right?
Yes.
And so, allopathic or conventional medicine is wonderful in some ways. It's amazing for acute cases. If you're going to have a stroke or a heart attack, you're not going to go to your naturopath.
Right.
To the nearest emergency room, right? And they're brilliant at emergency medicine, and they're brilliant at pain management. I don't know where I would be without conventional medicine on so many levels. But when it comes to something that is chronic and, it's been with you for a while, and, especially when it comes to, the autoimmune diseases or, the diseases of fatigue, where people find themselves really fatigued, like with, chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia, or adrenal fatigue, there's almost always underlying emotional blocks. And when you can meet that emotional block and work your way through it, whatever way, you choose to do that, that's an unburdening on both your body and your mind. And it's incredible. And, I've often said to my clients, and I've had to remind myself of this over the years as well, that, illness can be the best friend you never knew that you needed, because it can teach you so much about yourself, and it can teach you so much about just letting go.
Yeah.
And, right. And so, for me, I am so grateful that I had, this decades long, experience with autoimmunity. And, when you sort of are able to get to that point of gratitude, that, whatever you've been dealing with is probably on shaky ground, right? It's probably on shaky legs, because when you're coming to that point, where you're no longer fighting what is, it's going to loosen its grip on you. And ultimately, you can get to a place where it can let go of you.
Yeah, absolutely. That surrender piece in general. I mean, even for those listening today who aren't having physical, ailments or are sick physically in one way or another, the just the concept of surrender and being able to practice it on a daily basis is so important, because just to make life easier. I mean, why, it's like anything. When you resist something, it makes everything worse, right? It's like it just exacerbates the situation anyway. But when you come to a place where you accept it and you're okay with it and you make peace with it, it allows you to sort of be free and of it. And I just and I'm not talking about physical ailments here per se, but even just, you're at work and you have somebody maybe that just kind of is rubbing you the wrong way, right? It's like, well, think about that. What you're going to let that stimulus throw you all out of whack, and then you're going to get upset because you're upset about it. And then you try and repress it and stop it from happening, and it makes it worse. And we do all this stuff in our head. But really, if we just surrendered to it and just let it pass and move on, how much better would we feel?
Yeah. I mean, you're so right, because, the other thing that I think is so important for us all to remember, and I love your example of, the coworker that's rubbing you the wrong way. And you could use this with anything. It's the coworker that's rubbing you the wrong way, or, your physical body isn't cooperating, or, you bump up against some challenge, which of course, if you're human, you're just not going to avoid that. One of the things that has helped me so much, and it's one of the primary ways that I work with my clients, is that if we can remember that we've chosen everything that has come into our lives, including all of the challenges. And we've chosen that not from our ego selves, but from our soul selves, that, eternal self that is, one with everything else, that is that, eternal light and that wisdom. It chose these, very particular and specific experiences. And so, if you look at that through surrendered eyes, that, when you bump up against the coworker that you chose, or you, start to, experience some kind of a physical illness that you chose, you can sort of even come to embrace it in a way and say, and that doesn't mean you necessarily have to like it. You don't have to like the jerk that you work with at work. You don't have to like the excruciating pain that you're experiencing in your body. No one would. But what you can do is you can embrace the you that is experiencing all of that in the moment. So, there is a you that might be in physical pain, or there is a you that might feel deeply frustrated by someone that you work with. And can you have some compassion and really embrace that you that is having a struggle? And just that is incredibly relieving. It's incredibly, right? It's incredible. Like when you can offer yourself that same empathy that we want so badly for other people to offer us, it's a real game changer.
You're so right. You're so right. I was just writing something about that the other night. That quote. I think it was Plato that said, "Be kind," or I'm not going to quote it perfectly, but "Be kind to others, for you don't know what struggle they're dealing with."
Absolutely, yeah.
And so on the flip side of that, it's so easy for us to give. And I say it's easy. It's somewhat easy to give other people grace when you understand that, right? When that concept that you don't know what somebody else is going through right now, it makes it a lot easier to sort of just not even question where they're at, behaviorally wise. Like, okay, they're having a bad day today. I don't know what's going on with that. They have grace. It's easy to do that when you're in that mindset. But why is it's so hard for us to do that for ourselves? And we know what we're going through, and we still have a hard time giving ourselves the same grace that we would give to others. And it's such a fascinating thing of why, in general, it's just so much easier for us to treat other people better than we treat ourselves.
Yeah, it is. It is so fascinating. Like I was saying to someone the other day, and I had heard this from someone else, that, if we had someone following us around all day, every day, speaking to us like we speak to ourselves inside of our own head, we would call the cops and have them charged with harassment, right?
Yeah.
We're so hard on ourselves, and some of us are relentlessly hard on ourselves. And, we somehow come to believe that it's not okay to be messy. And yet life, by definition, is really quite messy. And, in speaking about, just people who are going through something, with their physical bodies, that's just sometimes part and parcel of the messiness of life.
Yeah.
And right. And so at the very, very least, if we can have some compassion for ourselves within the messiness, right? And realize and recognize that every other human being on the planet also is living an equally messy life. We don't feel so alone, and we don't feel so isolated. And those of us with perfectionist complexes, which is, many of us, especially in the Western world, because it's just drummed into our brains from the time we are really little. In other parts in the world, not so much, but certainly Western society, it's really drummed in. You push through. You never say die, and you overcome, and you've got to, you can't let these little things, get the better of you. And these are the messages that we hear from the time that we're really, really little. And so it affects our ability to be empathetic and compassionate and accepting of our own messiness. And yet the irony is, when we can get compassionate and empathetic and accepting of our own messiness, that's often when the messiness starts to clean itself up. Yeah,
absolutely. It's almost like if you try to remove the messiness, it's a futile thing. But when you become aware of the messiness and you become aware that you're the one who's recognizing and experiencing the messiness and that you're not the messiness itself, once you get that light of awareness in, that's like the first step. And the more that you become aware and conscious of that, it sort of starts to get better on its own.
It does. And, you just said something really poignant. You said, something to the effect of, when you accept the you that is experiencing the messiness. So that's actually a really important point, Adam. So, because a lot of people want to know more and more about this acceptance or this surrender when they're dealing with something like, let's say a physical illness. You're not necessarily accepting the illness or the pain, because that's a really tough one for a lot of people to swallow. But if you can accept the you that is experiencing that pain or that illness or that upset or that challenge or that messiness, that becomes a whole different ballgame. We can do that with a lot more ease. And that first step is often just like, it has a domino effect. It's like sort of kicking down the first domino, and the other things that need to fall into place from there will often just fall into place from there.
Absolutely. It kind of goes back to our last conversation when we were talking about the blueprint of our soul, and that when we remember that we have thoughts, but we're not our thoughts, right? We're this eternal soul, and that we have a body, but we're not our body, and but we're an eternal soul. And we in that awakening process where you become aware and present, and you just start to remember who we really are, right? You're not Anne, I'm not Adam. That may be our name here in this lifetime, but we're this eternal soul that's just lived and lived and lived, and will probably come back again. And, we're kind of going through what we're going through in this life for whatever reason, to learn the lessons that we are here to learn. And, of course, when you're dealing with a sickness or a trauma, it's not always easy to put on the smiley face and say, yep, I'm an eternal soul, so I'm okay with all of this, but the more that we can just keep that in mind, the easier it becomes to surrender. Absolutely.
I just read something, it was a quote by Eckhart Tolle, and I'm going to completely massacre that. I won't even try and, restate what he said, but essentially, he spoke of how consciousness itself is so incredibly wonderful for the immune system. And he actually used the words the immune system because, when you shift over from the little I or the little self into the big I or the eternal self, you can imagine what that does to the physical body. You're no longer in resistance to your life. You're living in total non-resistance. You're meeting everything with just an acceptance and even a curiosity. And the body, you can imagine what that does to the body. The body just stops contracting, really opens up, expands, and it's like it can take full breaths again. And, if you've ever done, if the listeners have ever done yoga, what it's like when you get into that class and you're just opening and opening and opening, and you're using the breath and you're taking these full, deep, complete breaths, how amazing you feel. And that really is, the experience of consciousness. And so, consciousness is probably about the best thing we could do for a physical body.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So, Anne, going back to your gift of medical intuition, or your ability of medical intuition, how did you discover that you had this ability?
Yeah, so this was, oh gosh, going back probably almost 15 years. I was very newly in my energy healing practice. And I had a client that I had been seeing for a few weeks. And I was just, she was talking to me. She had chronic back pain, and she was just a little bit stressed. Her grown son had moved back in with her, and he sort of wasn't pulling his weight. And, so I was helping her with that. And it was the end of a session. And I got her up on my table to sort of clear her energy body at the end of the session. And when I got, I never, at that time, I wasn't putting my hands directly on the body. I would just sort of hover them over and above the body. And when I got above her right breast, I saw a black misshapen energy. And I knew what it was. I had never seen anything like it before. I knew it was breast cancer. And I asked, sort of the higher selves in the room, if you will, if I was supposed to tell her, and I got a definitive no. So I did what I could, and I just worked with her body, and we said goodbye that day. And then she came back about 3 weeks later, and she sat down and she said, "So I found out last week that I have breast cancer in my right breast." And and she sort of looked at me, and she was also quite intuitive. And she said, you knew that, didn't you? And I said, yes, I did. I also knew that she would be okay. But that was my first experience of, holy smokes, I'm seeing something that I've never seen before, but I know exactly what it is that I'm seeing.
When you say you saw it, did you, was it like a clairvoyant type of seeing, or was it just that as you mentioned earlier, just a knowing? Like how did that appear to you?
So yeah, for me, that appeared as an actual black misshapen energy in her breast. So, for me, that appears sort of, it's kind of hard to explain. So that appears sort of behind my mind's eye. Okay. And simultaneously in the other person's body. So it's not like it's, it appears as like, a physical overlay on their body, but it's really an energy that I'm seeing. And that's how I saw that.
Oh, fascinating. So let's take that to the next. So once you're able to see something in someone's physical body, like this, this black energy that you saw, and granted, when people have medical conditions, by all means should go see a doctor. Do not go to a doctor because you're seeing an energy healer. An energy healer is a fantastic supplement to traditional medicine. So I just want to be clear about that with our listeners as we're talking about energy healing here. But from your perspective, and in terms of what you can do and how you're able to help your clients, once you're able to see something in someone's physical body, what can be done to help?
Yeah. So once you're able to pick up on, we'll go with the example of breast cancer, let's say. So, there's a malignant lump in the breast, and, I would depend. So every part of the body sort of holds a different resonance. And actually, a really great resource on this in particular is Louise Hay, who is an author. She passed away actually within, I think, the last year and a half or so. But Louise Hay wrote a brilliant book called Heal Your Body. And it's just a little pocket book. And she talks about sort of the different energies that are held in different parts of the body.
Huh.
So yeah, it's really, really fascinating. And it, it looks like what you would think it would look like. So someone, let's say with a thyroid issue, that your thyroid gland sits in and around your throat, is often issues of what you would assume a throat chakra issue would be. So issues of either communication. Throat chakras are also about giving and receiving. Thyroid issues are very often about giving too much and not receiving. And so you exhaust yourself, and lo and behold, you have a thyroid issue. The breasts are very much about either nurture or nourishment. And so, someone who presents with breast cancer, if we're looking at it just from, the energetic point of view, then you would want to take a look at where you are not feeling nurtured or nourished enough in your life. And, someone might say, well, maybe that started with mom. And, maybe that did start with mom, but something is going on so that today, here we sit today, and you're still feeling a lack of something. And so what is that? And you'd want to find out too, what are we withholding from ourselves? And so we would take a look at that, and we would take a look at the energy of that particular body system and find out if we can first meet that. So, we were talking before about just acceptance. So can we accept that there's an energy there whereby, let's say, I'm ignoring myself too much. I'm not giving myself enough, let's say spiritual nourishment. I'm giving everything to everyone else, but I'm not taking nearly enough time for myself. Okay, so, can we look at that? Can you first just accept that? Accept your humanness and your messiness. And so most people can say, okay, yeah, I can accept that. And then, often when we want to heal, there is often a behavioral change that is involved. So how can I spend more time nourishing myself or nurturing myself? Do I need to take more time for myself? Do I need to feed myself better? Do I need to just be kinder to myself? Do I need to sort of take a look at how I'm speaking with myself? And if I can't change those thoughts, because Adam, as you and I know, and we've talked about before, thoughts are kind of like runaway trains that we don't have a huge amount of control over. So could I maybe step back from that thought and choose to not believe it and just sit maybe a little bit more in that peaceful awareness that is inside of myself, that is inside of every single living being in the universe. And that is the seat of consciousness within every one of us. So can I go there a little bit more, every single day? And maybe I have to go there by meditating at first. And maybe after a while, I can go there while I'm driving. I can go there while I'm in a meeting. I can go there while I'm making dinner. And then that becomes the new habit, which is really one of the most healing things, if not the most healing things that we can do for ourselves.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Anne. And it's something that I've been learning, because when I first started to, awaken, most of the time I spent in meditation was really kind of taking back more of that seat, as you spoke about. And then, afterwards, I'd kind of just go on my way, and life was just life again. And then I couldn't wait to get back to meditate later again, because it was this space of freedom, right? Like I can just separate myself from my thoughts, or at least if I'm having thoughts, I'm able to see them for what they are, versus completely immersing myself and losing myself in them. And so, but now just intentionally practicing that same thing throughout daily life has become so helpful. And I still love meditating. I still, it's still a place where it's the ultimate comfort for me because it's quiet. My eyes are closed. Maybe the music's on light in the background that helps me get to a deeper state of relaxation. But you don't always have to be at that point of relaxation to be conscious enough to sort of step back into that seat of consciousness and just be present and be aware.
Absolutely. A lot of people actually talk about feeling, so yes, I so hear what you're saying about, meditation is an amazing way to, actively get there. And sometimes what happens a lot is that you will be, steeped in some challenge, and you can get so completely overwhelmed by that challenge that the mind sort of breaks in that moment, and something gives way in the body. It's like a dam that bursts in the body when we're so totally overwhelmed by something, and the next thing you know, you're just sitting in complete and utter silence. And because if you're so completely overwhelmed by what you're dealing with, you can go there. It's kind of like when people, you hear of people literally falling to their knees and saying, I can't do this one more minute, right? I can't do this one more minute. And what they're saying is, my mind cannot keep up to these demands one more minute. And so the mind blanks out for a minute. And then what arises in its place is consciousness. And so it's always there. It's just waiting for that opening to come through.
It's just so powerful how oftentimes you kind of do have to get pushed to that place where, it's like you try something over and over again and it doesn't work, right? And you get to a place where I give up. Like, I can't do this. I can't do this on my own anymore. And depending on some faiths, right? I mean, you hear it a lot in Christianity, right? Like I was at my breaking point. I couldn't take it anymore. And so I just prayed and asked Jesus to come in and to help me. And I felt this weight lifted off my shoulders, right? And so, and as we think of that, even that to an extent is just a conscious awakening, right? Of presence where, or regardless of if you're referring to Jesus or to the universe or to spirit, it's just a phenomenal place to be where you're not driving anymore.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's amazing. That's what's so incredible about surrender as it pertains to anything, as it pertains to healing, as it pertains to just, sort of even as a lifestyle, as living your life, when even you sort of, because surrender is really like an offering, right? It's like you're offering yourself up to something bigger than you. And so it's actually one of the best ways to sort of, till the soil or prepare the soil for consciousness to arise. And, that's why I love working with people with surrender, who are no matter what they're dealing with, because it really does make way for that part of us that's in all of us to arise when we say, okay, I can't fight this fight anymore. Like I don't have enough energetic resources within me to fight this fight. And again, what we're really saying is the little me has had enough of this.
The ego.
Right, exactly. The ego, and of course, the ego can only do so much. And sometimes when that collapses in the moment, in walks consciousness.
Yeah.
And it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it reminds me of this quote, and I pulled it up from Eckhart Tolle in A New Earth about suffering. And I was just re-listening to the book this morning because, that's one of those books you could listen to 100 times and you'll take away, 1,000 new things every time you listen to it.
For sure.
This is, this quote just really like just kicked me in the gut really hard. It's, suffering drives you deeper. The paradox is that suffering is caused by identification with form and erodes identification with form. A lot of it is caused by the ego, although eventually suffering destroys the ego, but not until you suffer consciously. And that suffering consciously piece just really hit home, right? So, his point being so poignant in that when we suffer in the present, when we're suffering, we're not resisting it, we're not fighting it, we're not suppressing it, but we're just doing so consciously. That's when the ego gets minimized. That's when the effect of the ego gets suppressed, if you will, right? And that's where the true spiritual side, and maybe even, and as we talk about, medical intuition, where the healing begins.
Oh, absolutely. You're so right. We will get tested at different points in our life and through different, various avenues, and so many people that will be through physical illness or physical challenge. And, at some point, the ego will just not be able to make enough justifications or have enough scary thoughts or, have enough, reasons why this shouldn't be happening. And this is what we need to do to fix this. And if you would just do this, then it would all go away. At some point, the ego exhausts itself. And we want the ego to exhaust itself, right? Because it's the ego is just, it's just a Band-Aid in the best of cases and a real tyrant at the worst of cases. And so when that collapses or gives way, I love that quote by Eckhart Tolle. Our suffering actually becomes very poignant, and it opens a door for us to walk through into a completely different space. And that's always a life changer. That's why, again, I often say to people, if you let it, whatever it is you're dealing with, whatever ailment or illness or challenge you're dealing with, might just be your doorway into freedom.
Absolutely. So, Anne, I know we're coming up on our time here. I do want to ask you one more question, and we'll let this be the final question of the podcast. So, when is a good time for somebody to see a medical intuitive?
Yeah. So, if someone has felt like, and as you said, I'll echo what you said earlier. It's never to be a replacement for, sound medical advice or, or reference. But if someone is curious about the deeper nature of what might be going on with them, that would be a great opportunity to go and see someone who practices medical intuition, because, someone that's done this for a while and that is, accustomed to working with the energy body can probably really point to some, unconscious blocks that are likely present. And when you can start working with those unconscious blocks, typically people will start to get some relief for what they've been dealing with.
Wonderful. Well, Anne, I can't thank you enough again for taking the time to be with us on the SpiritWoke podcast. It's always such a pleasure to have these conversations with you. I learned so much from you, and I know our I know our listeners do too. I hear it from them, especially, of course, as of recording this, only your spirit guide episode has been published on our site, but I've heard so many positive and responses to that podcast, and just so much. I wish I could go into and share some of that. We just don't have the time, but I'm just so grateful for your willingness to spend the time as you do with our audience.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's so fun talking to you, Adam. We always have the best conversations, and you ask amazing questions. And, all of this is so timely right now for what the world is going through. So thank you for doing this. It's always so much fun to chat with you.
That it is. It's always a pleasure. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to find Anne, check her out on her website at soulfulsurrender.com, soulfulsurrender.com. And you can find out more about Anne there. I'll also have a bunch of information about Anne on the page that this podcast is hosted on. So definitely check that out as well. And until next time, friends, take care of yourselves.
Thanks for listening to the SpiritWoke Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to check out our website, spiritwoke.com, and connect with the SpiritWoke community on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just search SpiritWoke. Join us next time for another edition of the SpiritWoke Podcast. Namaste.